Hello and welcome to The Actor and the Engineer. My name is Paul James. I am the actor.
My name is Josh Knapp. I'm the broadcast engineer.
Here we go, Josh. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Yeah.
2019, huh?
Yeah, 2019. And we're almost breaking the 20s. So, yeah, it seemed like back in 2000, I was like, man, it's 2000, not 1999. And now I'm just like, it's just another year. I don't know what you call the 20s. This will be called the 20s. Next year, it will be the 20s. So that's so weird that
it'll be 2022.
Well, yeah, but when I think of the 20, when everybody thinks of the 20s, they think about the 1920s. Nobody gets that mixed up with the 1820s or the 1520s for that matter. But now that it'll be weird to talk about the 20s. So, all right. Well, after that digression, we will go into our discussion on Adam McKay's new movie that is his follow-up to The Big Short, the Academy Award-winning Big Short, Vice. So I guess he decided to make a movie about Dick Cheney and kind of where he came from. I guess you could call it. I mean, it is a biopic, but it's kind of different than a straight up biopic. So he kind of adds his own Adam McKay-ness to it. So I was excited about this from the trailer, and the style of the trailer made me interested, and also seeing what Christian Bale has done, not only physically but also his mannerisms, and getting a good idea of the tone of what I thought the tone of the movie was going to be from the trailer. I was excited about it. It was one of the few movies that I really was looking forward to from the end of the year. So it was pretty much Suspiria and this one were the two that I was really excited to see. So, and I don't even necessarily agree with Adam McKay's politics specifically, but I was interested to see what he would do with this kind of I don't even know if he's a polarizing figure. This kind of figure that definitely has a certain standing in American history, especially now. So, what about you? Were you anticipating this one, or just kind of along for the ride?
Just along for the ride. I saw this film because we decided to talk about it on the podcast. It's not that I wouldn't see this film for any other reason other than time and money, like we've talked about a million times before. If I had unlimited resources financially and time, I would see all these films in the theater. But since I don't, I have to pick and choose. And this would not have made the choice list if it wasn't for the podcast. I was a huge fan of The Big Short. We've talked about that a million times over. I think you actually said that you had doubted that Adam McKay would win the Oscar. And I said, you never know with things like that. And I had predicted that The Big Short would take adapted screenplay, and he ended up winning. So I'm interested in his voice. I'm interested in what he has to say. I'm not so much interested in political biopics. But that's not to say that once I'm there, I'm not interested. I am interested. It's like seeing The Post last year. Not interested at all about that subject. But once I saw the movie, I was over the moon about it. I was thrilled. I was good to know something like that existed and could educate me, not necessarily for the facts of the situation, but for me to go and look up the facts of the situation. That's kind of what I've done with this film. So not interested really, but glad I saw it, and it has sparked some interest in what happened during those two presidential terms, and I have looked up quite a few things. I don't know much about Donald Rumsfeld, but now he's on my Google search because I'm interested. I don't really know anything about Dick Cheney other than the heart attacks and his quietness and him being the VP, and it's interesting to see a theatrical take on a subject matter. And I guess the positive is, and there's a lot of positive, but the positive is it definitely sparked my interest to figure out, to investigate more things about this subject matter. So that's good.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think that's actually a good thing to take away from the movie because, this is not a, there's kind of a disclaimer at the beginning of the movie that says this is based on a true story. We did our best. But really, I don't think it should be taken as a documentary because there are a bunch of things that happened in this movie that were either between two people or, I mean, are not able to be corroborated. So, but I think that as far as the story goes, as far as this character goes, when looking at it like as a movie, I think it was well put together. And it's interesting that the two most recent movies I've seen in the theater are this movie and Aquaman. And I think for me, the big difference between these, or the problems that I had with Aquaman, were the things that made me like this movie a lot more, and it all came down to tone. And for me, I felt like it seemed like Aquaman felt unsure of its tone, especially with the Aquaman character, and everybody else was like super serious in that movie, and they tried to make Aquaman like be funny in certain places, or have like really in certain areas. I don't want to get into too many like spoilery things about Aquaman, but there were times when we were supposed to really take his character super seriously, and then there were also like jokey times for him, and it didn't seem to fit in with the movie. Whereas I feel like Vice easily shifts its tone, but the tone isn't really based on the character's actions or the dialogue delivery of the characters. It's really the filmmaking style and like the scene construction changes and the scene settings that indicate a change in tone. And for me, they did that in Adam McKay did that in The Big Short too. But for me, that makes me feel like there's a filmmaker that is a lot more comfortable with, where they're kind of shepherding the audience. And I mean, some of the tone shifts, some of the choices made in this movie are really bold choices, and I think some of them worked amazingly well. And there was one or maybe two that for me didn't land how I thought that they might have wanted it to land. But I still felt like there was a confident hand on this movie, and that made me enjoy it even more, like setting aside the performances, which I'm sure we'll get into here in a little bit.
Let me interject something really quick. I think for me, I understand exactly what you're saying, because strangely enough, the last movie of 2018 I saw was Aquaman on Christmas Day. And then this is the first movie. There's a big meme on Facebook and Twitter. What's the last movie of 2018 and the first movie of 2019? Here's the difference for me. Aquaman tries to please everybody by putting something for everybody in there. And that's fine. It's a big popcorn movie. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I think that's what you're talking about with tonal shifts and trying to make him funny and then serious. This is pleasing one person, Adam McKay. His story, it's serving his story, and he doesn't have to apologize or interject things to have the audience pleased, because he's telling a story that is based on a story he's written. So it's not like based on any kind of mythology or comic book or anybody's expectation, with the exception of maybe Dick Cheney's family or relatives or the Bush family. I don't know. There's nobody to really please. He can just tell the story he wants. So he can pick the tone and choose the tone and switch the tone when he wants to. I think that's the big difference. They're two entirely different films on every level, but I know exactly what you're talking about. It seems to be, here's the kitchen sink in Aquaman, no pun intended. Here's the seahorse, here's the crab, what do you want? Oh, we need sharks with lasers. Okay, somebody's going to want sharks with lasers. In this film, he's serving a story. And so I don't think there are as many pitfalls when it comes to tone with this film.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think he is serving the story, but he's also doing it in a kind of like it's a fairly unorthodox way. There is a narrator in this movie, but the narrator is actually a character in the film, as opposed to being an omniscient narrator. And they also kind of like reference that, where the narrator comes in and he's like, this is me. Who am I? You'll find out later. And you get to hear him initially, and then you get to get introduced to him, and then he comes back into the story later. So I thought that was a really cool device that they used to impart information, because some of this stuff, there are kind of like multiple sections of the movie where there are information dumps, where it's like, we need to tell you about this. We need to tell you about how power in Washington works. And that's when they do the kind of like, minifigure type board game type setup that Donald Rumsfeld tells Dick Cheney about. And then later on, they have this kind of like crazy off the wall. It kind of reminded me of a skit, like an SNL skit or a Monty Python type thing, where they're all sitting around the table and they are being told, what's on the menu as far as being able to, to fight and defeat terrorism. And they go through and have extraordinary rendition, and they tell them that there's enhanced interrogation tactics, waterboarding are available, and they go through that whole thing, and then they say, Dick Cheney says, we'll take them all. So, that scene is kind of, it's trying to like juxtapose, it's trying to make light of the actual things that, that they were choosing at that time. But I think it also, I mean, it's done in a funny way, and there's really no better way of, I mean, he does kind of like put that front and center in front of the viewers. There were some clips of showing enhanced interrogation tactics, showing Abu Ghraib prison and the video and pictures that were taken in that prison and what our soldiers did there. So, I mean, yeah, he's not shying away from it, but he's also trying to kind of like help this movie along, I think, in moving things forward. So I thought it was cool that they started with 9/11 to kind of give the kind of like focus on like, this is where this character ends up and at this particular moment, and where he starts to kind of like enact his power in this story. And his whole life is built up to that moment. So then we jump back to see how the movie gets him there. And one thing I didn't realize, and the movie is really spending a lot of time focusing on this, is how integral into his story and his life, obviously his life, but how integral his wife, Lynn Cheney, played by Amy Adams, is into how he ends up the vice president of the United States. So that's a thing that I didn't really know much about, because obviously he was very quiet, but also she seemed. I hadn't heard much about her, in the news, at least once he was vice president. But obviously she's held multiple positions and things, and she was integral in getting him where he was. But they really kind of lean heavy on that. And the first thing I wrote down in my notes was, all in caps, Amy Adams has not won an Academy Award.
Well, the thing about that, though, is that you have to understand that she's in good company. If that never happens, we're talking about Peter O'Toole never won a competitive Oscar. Richard Harris never won a competitive Oscar. Richard Burton never won a competitive Oscar. There's a ton of people who've never won Oscars and have been nominated 6, 7, 8 times. It's just that every time you see her, just like Nicole Kidman, and the only reason why I'm referencing Nicole Kidman is because we talked about her and how great she is in almost everything that she does.
She was good in Aquaman.
Yeah, she was good. She was very good. Hook, line, and sinker, that's, I think, the best fight sequence in the film, that opening sequence with her. It's simple, it's to the point, and then that shot of her like, what do you got next, is great. You're right, she is good in everything. So, and plus, there's a picture of her for the Golden Globes on IMDb. That's what made me think of her. But she's like Amy Adams. Basically, anything that they do, they should be nominated for and or win for. So we could talk a little bit more about her later on, because I do have some minor issues with stuff. Not necessarily her, but just the character in general. But yeah, so it's mind-blowing. But she's in good company. That said, we talked about Julianne Moore for years and how she doesn't have an Oscar. She does not have an Oscar. We talked about Sam Rockwell and Allison Janney and all of these people who deserve to win Oscars, and then they're up for these Oscars, and we're not 100% sure those are the Oscars that Leonardo DiCaprio. We're not 100% sure, and I'm saying we, as in the majority of people that I've read, have said, yes, he's great, or yes, she's great, but I wish they had won for this, but I'm glad they're going to win an Oscar. And I'm fine with that too. So Amy Adams is it just has to be her year. It just has to be one of those ones where everybody clears out and she's the clear standout. And unfortunately, she's in those years where it's the person who won, you can't really discuss it past the fact that they won. And you go, oh, okay, yeah, now I know why she didn't win. But so she's in good company, and she will one day be an Academy Award winner.
Yeah. Well, I hope so. But and it did obviously kind of gave me gave me a flashback to her character in The Master, how it is kind of like a in the shadows type of helping in her time, in her state, that kind of a thing, in her station in life. This was the way for her to move forward. This was the way for her to succeed, was to hitch her star to a wagon, or whatever that phrase is, and or hitch her wagon to a star. That's probably it. And so yeah, that's that's kind of how the film starts. But I was kind of amazed at all of the different actors, like pretty much like character actors that they got to fill out the cast, and some of them obviously weren't in it for very much. The big one is Sam Rockwell playing George W. Bush. Had like, I don't know, 3-4 scenes maybe. But I mean, he's great. He was really good. Shea Wiggum was Lynn Cheney's dad, and he's in everything. He's in a bunch. He was just, most recently, I saw him in Homecoming, that Amazon Prime show with Julia Roberts, and he was great in that.
Silver Linings Playbook. He's the brother. He's Bradley Cooper's brother.
You're right. See, he's in everything. He's
great.
We got Jesse Plemons. We got Tyler Perry as Colin Powell, who's great. Initially, I was like, wait, is that? Oh, yeah, that is Tyler Perry. So I was like, that's pretty cool. Eddie Marzan plays Paul Wolfowitz. He's been in everything. He's a British actor. He was in Sherlock Holmes. He's been in a bunch of stuff. I think he was in The Departed, maybe. I don't know. I have to look it up. But
he's in Ray Donovan.
Oh, is he in Ray Donovan? I haven't seen any of Ray Donovan.
Yeah, he's good. He plays Ray Donovan's older brother.
Oh, cool. All right.
Yeah.
Allison Pill plays one of the Cheney daughters, Mary, who is gay, and they have to deal with that early on in the film, and then they kind of move on throughout the film, and that comes back up, and you can tell that that's a difficult thing for this family in the position that they're in the Republican Party specifically at that time. So yeah, she plays Mary Cheney, and Bill Camp, who we've talked about a bunch, even within the last year, plays Gerald Ford, and he's in that new Paul Dano movie, Wildfire, that has Carey Mulligan and Jake Gyllenhaal in it. I do want to see that. I think it's kind of come and gone, but I've heard good things about it. So he's one of the main characters in that movie. So yeah, he's But anyway, you've got this is like a huge stable of actors, great actors playing really small parts for maybe one or two scenes, and then we already kind of like talked a little bit about Donald Rumsfeld, played by Steve Carell, who, I mean, obviously he's kind of bringing back some of the gang. He's worked. Adam McKay's worked with Amy Adams before in Talladega Nights. He worked with Steve Carell and Christian Bale in The Big Short, his previous movie before this. So yeah, I mean, he's kind of bringing everybody back. So we haven't talked about Christian Bale at all. I mean, as an actor, did what he did it feel like it was like a mimic type of a thing, or do you feel like he really kind of like got in there and did some real work?
Well, it's hard to say that it's not a mimic when he's mimicking somebody. I mean, I guess mimic connotates almost a exaggeration. Yeah, it's almost a joking way of teasing somebody, but it is mimicking at its core. I think that what Christian Bale did is impressive because it's such a quiet character, and he's known as such a quiet character to everybody else, with the exception of, his Justin Kirk, who you didn't mention as one of the actors. I don't know if you know who he is. He plays Scooter Libby.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
he's been in tons of things. He was in the Mike Nichols Angels in America. He was in Weeds. He's just
Cool.
everywhere, and he's very good. Anyway, so unless Dick Cheney is talking to those people, he's a very quiet, reserved human being who stands in a very particular way and has a very particular posture. And that's the stuff that I found the most impressive is that when he's standing in the back of the room, if you blurred your eyes just the right way, and sometimes you didn't even need to blur your eyes, he looked like Dick Cheney. I was like, whoa. Speaking of which, Sam Rockwell is nominated for the Golden Globe, and he's in 3 scenes, and he should be because it's uncanny how much he looks and acts like Bush. It's unnerving because I kept thinking to myself, well, does Sam Rockwell look like him?
Normally?
Like, well, it's like Bono and Robin Williams look alike, but nobody ever, I never noticed it until somebody said, "You ever notice that Bono is now looking like Robin Williams?" And I was like, no. And then I looked and I was like, yes. And so Sam Rockwell always looked like George W. Bush and we just never noticed it until today. I don't know, but it's uncanny how much he looks like him and he sounds like him too. So yeah, I enjoyed what Christian Bale did. I just have some questions about this film in general that I'm not sure his performance will answer for me, because we've talked about this before in the past where a performance and or an ensemble of acting can save a movie for me, because obviously that's what I'm interested in, obviously that's what my hobby is, and obviously I respect the craft of acting. So if you can do something above and beyond what the script allows you to do, I find that even more impressive. And I think he does. I can start with some of the less positive qualities of about this film by saying I don't think the script serves him well. I don't think the idea behind this movie serves the performance well. I think the performance serves the movie well, but I just don't. It's just something about the way that the movie is told that is not complete for me. And that's not Christian Bale's fault. There is no spark outside of the imitation of this character that you would think this would be Oscar bait. And I never use those terms because I just don't believe in that. I just don't believe somebody sets themselves up to become an Oscar nominee by picking a certain role. I'm sure it happens, and I'm sure it's happened before. But for me, I'm very idealistic when it comes to the Oscars and believe in the honor and the tradition of celebrating somebody who steps above and beyond. And I think Christian Bale does his job very well in this, but I was expecting to come out thinking Christian Bale is going to get another Oscar nomination. Not that that's the end-all, be-all level of understanding of somebody's character, but there's just no spark there. And I don't know if that's the character, and I don't know if that's the script. I think it's a combination of both. But the answer to your question is he did his job. He did it well. And if that was me, I'd be very impressed with myself. So, I mean, he became Dick Cheney to me. I saw Dick Cheney even when he wasn't balding and gray and the Dick Cheney that we know. He looked completely different as a character in the beginning of the film. Well, I'm not necessarily beginning, but when they do the flashbacks, when he's younger, Dick Cheney, when he's got the darker hair, he looks completely different. So good for him that he can make these transitions. But there's just something missing for me. And I'm going to repeat that statement throughout this whole entire podcast.
Well, first of all, I think that, yes, he did make a physical transformation, but we should also give props to the makeup department because I think that there's a lot of makeup that went into that. I did read an article that was talking about how he spent 4 hours in the makeup chair every morning. And I mean, whether it was he was the older Dick Cheney or the younger Dick Cheney, it probably didn't really matter. It was, I'm sure there was a lot of prosthetics and all kinds of stuff that he had to put on just to like finish that. But still, I feel like, I don't know, for me, I felt like Christian Bale played the character sympathetically. Like he was really not trying to like take down this person. He was trying to understand the motivations behind this person, whether he agreed with them or not. That wasn't his job. I mean, it was something that he was trying to me at least, he was trying to find the humanity in a person who a lot of people don't feel like has any humanity. And so in so doing that was, probably helping to. Well, I think with the performance that I felt like he gave, helped to validate some of the things that you see in the movie, as far as like, what are Dick Cheney's motivations, and what does Dick Cheney feel about this? And that's couched inside of a movie that's saying Dick Cheney did all these bad things, but what does the character inside the film think about it? And then, we'll get into spoilers a little later on that kind of like codifies a lot of that close to the end of the movie. Well, right at the end of the movie. But I thought that was a bold thing to do when you have it's like Adam McKay's got the microphone. He can say whatever he wants. And he's allowing this character to be on screen and to have a sympathy, at least that I felt, and I think a lot of that had to do with, it had to do with the script, but it also had to do with the way that Christian Bale portrayed the character, and Amy Adams too, and so it made me want to. It actually helped to humanize, Dick Cheney for me. So, which, I mean, some people may feel is bad, but I think that's always a good thing. I think if you can try to understand someone, what their motivations are, it may help to at least figure out, like, you may think they're crazy, you may disagree with them, but they still are a human, and they are another person.
So let me ask you a question. So through what the script was telling us and through the narrative, you felt that you could understand what choices Dick Cheney made and why he made them?
Yeah, because he was about power. Like, power was his drug. Power was his motivating force. And when you get to a certain point in your career, then, he got to a certain point in his career where he made the realization that power and title aren't necessarily the same thing, and power and legacy aren't necessarily the same thing. He was able to wield more power as the vice president with the right president. In the context of this movie, he was able to wield more power that way than if he were president somehow, which he probably wouldn't. I mean, you see in the movie, you see the projections that they have. He's he's all the way at the bottom of 20 people who they do a poll about, like, who would you vote for president. He was way at the bottom, so that he knew there was no way for him to be president, but he wasn't willing to give up the thirst for power, or like the quest for power. So he figured out an ingenious way to still have that same power, but without without that kind of like legacy that a president that somebody being the president would have.
So understanding that about the character based on this movie, did you feel sympathetic towards the character, or you just understood what the character was doing? Because I'm not really following, and this is going to be the main point for me, I'm not really following what the purpose of this film was. What was the meaning of this film? Why are we watching this film? Was it to show us that, and I'm not saying that the director, who happens to be the screenwriter too, and or you and or me, have to justify what was on the screen. I'm saying that he doesn't need to say, yes, this was a bad choice, or yes, this was a good choice, or yes, we should be sympathetic towards him, or yes, we should see him as a human being. But I'm not understanding why we watched this movie.
Yeah.
What was the reason to tell this story? And it sounds to me like you're trying to say that Christian Bale humanized the character to where you could understand it and why he did what he did, but not necessarily sympathize or say that was okay, legitimize what his choices were.
Well, yeah, I think that Adam McKay specifically thinks that because Dick Cheney was vice president on September 11th, 2001, and because he had the power that he had at that moment, that a bunch of things happened right after that. That is what Adam McKay is saying. We went to war in Iraq. We went to war in Afghanistan. We, all of these things, there were enhanced interrogation tactics were accepted by the Department of Defense. Extraordinary rendition was being used. All of those things, That's what Adam McKay is saying. He's saying if Dick Cheney was not at this point, at this moment, then things may have been different in American history. So I think he's kind of like codifying that down and boiling all that down and saying like, here's how he got here, and this is what happened once he was here. And maybe there was a chance that things could have been different, and that is what Adam McKay is saying. And that's, I mean, that's, I think, the point of the movie. And he also, I mean, with any movie nowadays, like since Trump has become president, any movie that has a political bent or little like, subplot to it even is going to reference Donald Trump. So that's kind of like, I think that's it being extended, this movie is being extended into today. And I don't think this movie would have been made if Donald Trump wasn't president. I don't know. But for me, I'm looking at it from, this is a guy who, this could have easily been, fictional Fahrenheit 9/11 or whatever. This could have been, a hit piece or something. He could have painted Dick Cheney as a soulless human that has no care for any other human being. But he didn't, and I think because of certain scenes in there, scenes with his family, like when his daughter comes out to him, and his wife, how he said that's okay. Now later on he goes against that, and for political reasons, which is horrible. But at that moment he could have easily taken that out or left that out or whatever. But I think Adam McKay is allowing those things in, and they're also kind of like searching to figure out, what makes this guy tick. And so that is, to me, that's a lot more interesting than me watching an hour and a half of Dick Cheney's horrible, right? Like that doesn't, I don't know. That's not fun for me. And it's not even, I mean, you can get that on, blogs and news reports and stuff. So that's fine. But this was a lot more interesting to me than that.
I felt nothing throughout the whole entire movie until, the personalization of coming out and having that used against you in the future, and having family members really show their true colors about stuff like that. That, of course, I can personalize because I've lived that. But I don't know. There's just and I was driving home, and my father said when I got home, he said, "What'd you think of the film?" I said, and he goes, "Well, maybe your podcast buddy will explain it to you." And I said, "I hope." Josh has a way of clarifying things that made me go, "Oh, okay. No, I didn't really see that, but now I can sense that based on what Josh just said, and now let me go and think about it from that point of view." But to be honest with you, that didn't even light me up. I mean,
yeah, let's pick one scene. So, earlier on in the movie, you have his daughter Mary comes out as gay, and he says, and you could tell that Lynn Cheney, Amy Adams kind of looks at him, and he says, it's okay, we love you no matter what. And then later on in the movie, Mary's obviously not there, but the other daughter is there, and I am blanking on her name.
Lily Rabe.
So that's the actress. But so the other daughter there is there, and she's running for Liz, and she's running for to be a representative in Wyoming. So you've got this interesting scenario in which, I mean, everybody's looking to Dick Cheney again, and he's having to choose between he's essentially choosing between one daughter and the other daughter. Now, he ends up going with the daughter that gets his name still, in government and in power, and his family still has power, and I think it's still motivated by power, but it's also maybe a small bit motivated by love. Not necessarily love for the family as a family unit, but love for a portion of the family, and then also a lot of selfishness and seeking power and all that those things. So that's another way to look at that scene that, I mean, Adam McKay doesn't he isn't hitting you over the head with a hammer where, Dick Cheney's like, well, on one hand, I have a daughter who's gay. And on the other hand, I have a daughter who wants to be in the House of Representatives. I need to pick one or the other. But that's another way to look at that scene. That's not just like, Dick Cheney's a horrible person because he doesn't like his gay daughter. No, Dick Cheney feels like he has to fit into this system that at that moment in time in Wyoming, he knew his daughter wasn't going to be able to be elected if she was, for gay marriage. Bottom line. And so he made that choice at that moment for one daughter against another daughter, which obviously is a horrible choice, but it's not a great choice to have to make.
But I think, well,
it's not. I mean, so here's one thing. For that character, I'm not saying. I mean, if I had to make that choice, it would be an easy choice for me. But, but for him, for that character, for what that character's done all of his life, and how power has essentially like grabbed a hold of him, and he doesn't want to get rid of it. That's a hard choice for him, and he ends up going the way that he goes.
Right, and I don't think it has anything to do with daughter against daughter or family member against family member. I think it has to do with what's going to allow the daughter to win.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, that's the choice that he advises her to go with. So in a way, I can kind of separate that political idea that winning is the end-all be-all. That's the objective, that you must win. So if you need to say things, and politicians do it all the time, and then they backpedal. Yeah, and then they backpedal, and then they become president, or they become the senator, or become the mayor, and then they realize, oh, this was very idealistic, which is the word of the podcast, of me to say that. This is not really how this works. You cannot just close Guantanamo Bay overnight. It's just not how it works. And whether or not you're politically against that kind of action, that's just not a functional way to be the president. So you learn things. So he wanted to win. Here's my question. So he grabbed onto power, and he realized that power was the thing, and he realized that being the vice president and being quiet, which is the statement in the beginning of the film, is the quote in the beginning of the film, basically that what the loud man in the room has to say because he's loud, but the quiet one is the one you should pay attention to because you're never sure. So he sits quietly, and he realizes that if he sits quietly, he can still do all this stuff behind closed doors and have all of this power. To what purpose? They don't ever in the film show you what the power gains him. What does it gain him? What did he get from it? I mean, okay, so if you get elected president and you become the most powerful man in the world, or what used to be the most powerful position in the world, that is an elixir. That is, seductive, that kind of power. And then you see what that power can bring you, and then you start doing things based on your power. What did the film show us that Dick Cheney got from power other than power? Here's an example of what I'm talking about. So the obvious scene in the beginning of the film where he's drunk and he's singing the song and the officer pulls him over, is that a statement about who he was as a human being back then and how he's evolved into this more refined, quiet, less buffoonish person? Or is that a statement about this officer has more power than I do, but I don't want him to, so I'm going to try to gain power throughout my existence? Like,
that's not.
I'm at a loss.
That's not what I got out of it. I got out of it is that he was directionless. He literally fell into going to Yale, dropped out of Yale because he couldn't hack it, and he came back to Wyoming. Was working as a lineman, and went out drinking with his buddies all the time, and he had to get bailed out of, he had multiple DUIs, had to get bailed out of jail multiple times by his girlfriend, and his girlfriend has a come to Jesus meeting with him and says, like, I can find another guy, no big deal. You need to shape up or else I'm going to leave or whatever. I'm going to, I'm not going to be your girlfriend anymore. And here's what you need. She gave him a direction. And then once it's pretty, I don't know. For me, it was fairly clearly laid out. Once he had that direction, once he got into Washington, D.C. in that intern program, he didn't even know. I mean, this is obviously apocryphal. I don't know if anybody has backed up this whole, like, him, leaning over to somebody else and being like, what party is that guy, in pointing to Donald Rumsfeld, and like, oh, he's a Republican. He's like, oh, that's good. I am too. Saying that, like, he had no idea. He had no party affiliations. He had no opinions on anything. And in fact, later on in the movie, he even asked Donald Rumsfeld, he's like, so what's our opinion on this? What's our position on this? And Rumsfeld just laughed him off, saying, like, it's not about opinions. It's not about positions. It's about power. It's about where you can grab and who you can move around, and what people you can get to do things for you, and what money you can either get to them or they can get to you. And that's all it's about. I mean, that's the reductive version of Washington, D.C. power. And the ultimate enacting of that power is on 9/11, when he literally is sitting there calling the shots, and there's no oversight whatsoever. So our government, that's built on checks and balances and oversight and declarations of war and Congress being involved, all of that went out the window on September 11th, according to Adam McKay in this movie. So that's the ultimate power. He has the ability to wage war, unilateral power to wage war on anyone he wants at that moment, and to do anything he wants. Divert these planes, move these things over here, shut all the airports down. He's doing all of that unilaterally without asking anyone. That is the ultimate power.
So it's power for power's sake. It's because what does that power bring to his life?
Money.
Other than just power.
It brings him money. He's able to give money to his
he
friends.
has money. He has money by the time he becomes the vice president.
I don't know.
He's the CEO of that big billion-dollar company.
Yeah, Halliburton. But we're also two people who can't. I don't feel like I can understand what that power would do to someone. I don't have the drive to control other people.
But that's my point.
Okay.
This film should allow us to explore that side of the human psyche and come out with how we feel about it, whether or not that's an elixir to us, whether or not that's seductive to us. And it's supposed to, I believe your emotions when you're watching a film are a barometer of how you run your life. So if that's something you look into and say, like, yeah, I totally get why he did what he did, and he's very powerful, and I want to be able to just ground airplanes whenever I want to, or I want to not be able to tell the president of the United States something very important when a terrorist attack just happens. In between the terrorist attack, though, because it happens between the Pentagon and the second plane, which I thought was interesting. And so as a barometer of our emotions, we should come out of that movie going, oh, we side on this aisle of how we feel about power. None of that happened for me in this movie. I came out not concerned at all that a human being did what he did. Not at all. And I'm wondering what it is in the storytelling process that didn't allow me access to those feelings. And maybe that's not what Adam McKay wanted, but for me personally, that's what I'm missing from this film. I'm missing some kind of understanding. There are a lot of choices people make in movies that I would never want to make in real life, and I have an opinion about how I think I would act. Let's reference The Killing of a Sacred Deer, last year's film. The lead character has to make a very specific choice at the end of that film. I could never make that choice, okay? He has to make a choice, and he has to stick by it, okay? And Yorgos Lanthimos does some interesting things in the way he films that one scene where the character doesn't really know what he's doing, but he does know what he's doing. For people who've seen the film, they understand what I'm talking about. I'm trying not to give too much away because it is an important part of that movie. But when I came out of that movie, I thought to myself, what would I do in that situation? Okay, I definitely feel like before I started this movie, I would never put myself in that situation, and I would make a different choice. But once I was in that movie, I'm not sympathizing with that terrible choice that character made, and I'm not validating that, but I understood why the character made that choice based on everything that Yorgos Lanthimos frames around that moment. This film, there's no framing. He just hangs the idea in front of me, and it dissipates as soon as it comes on screen, and it dissipates as soon as it moves on to the next one. So I'm wondering, whatever that is, and I'm sure there's a term for it, and I just am not educated enough to know what that term is, but there has to be some gauge or some barometer or some meter, some measurement of how I would react as a human being in that situation. And I'm not saying that I wouldn't have done the exact same thing that Dick Cheney does in that situation, in that realm of this storytelling process. But none of that was there for me. I just went, okay.
Well,
okay.
I think the word you were looking for is ephemeral. Like it was there and then it was gone.
Yes.
Yeah.
But there's got to be a term for how you, I guess it's maybe sympathetic towards the character or an understanding of a character. We like Hannibal Lecter, but he eats people. But there is a vulnerability to Anthony Hopkins' 26-minute performance that won him an Academy Award for Best Actor because he brought this quality to it. And Jonathan Demme surrounds that character with all of these interesting ideas, and you have to figure out where you fall in the frame of what that situation would be like if you were in it. Are you the doctor who abuses him? Are you Clarice who tries to understand him? Are you the FBI agent who stands completely void of any emotion towards it? Where do you fall in this scenario? And none of that's there for me in this film.
I think Hannibal Lecter is a dynamic antagonist, and the scary part is that Dick Cheney doesn't have to be dynamic, but he can affect many more people than Lecter can. Hannibal Lecter can eat 5 people's faces off, but Dick Cheney in this movie specifically, what Adam McKay is saying is that Dick Cheney sent tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of our troops to Iraq for no reason. That's what he's saying. And so that's a lot more effective and impactful in the world than Hannibal Lecter eating 5 people's faces off. So even though he's not dynamic, he has so much more effect on everybody's life than Hannibal Lecter would.
But I need to know, in a nutshell, I'll condense this, why he chose to do that. What was the reason why he chose to do that?
Let's get into spoilers, because spoilers from now on for Vice. I think it's because he felt like that was the right thing to do. And he says that at the end of the movie. When he talks to the camera, he truly believes, like, I don't think that Dick Cheney has any problem going to sleep at night. I really don't. Because he felt like that was the right thing to do at that moment. So, which is pretty much impossible to, talk somebody out of. So, and nowadays, especially with polarizing political views, there's no way people can talk other people out of their points or talk other people out of their opinions, because you feel threatened when someone questions your opinion, and you don't have it's hard to have discussions, open discussions about things that don't end up in either screaming or threats or whatever. So yeah, it's rough, but I think that he probably feels like that was the right thing to, and he does. I mean, that's what Adam McKay thinks too, I think, because that was the little thing at the end was him looking straight into the camera saying, like, it was essentially his, you need me on this wall, you want me on this wall. It was him saying, doing the Jack Nicholson from A Few Good Men. So it's that's what I think that they're trying to get across. But let's talk about some other things. Let's talk about the Jesse Plemons character. We got to move forward, because I thought that was a cool. You're cracking up over there.
I'm laughing because I think my non-understanding of this film is frustrating you a little bit. At least my interpretation of what I'm reading from watching you and your body language is that it's frustrating to not completely connect when you've connected to a film. And what you're saying, actually, the last thing that you said about the comparison to Jack Nicholson makes sense to me. And if that's what Adam McKay wanted, that's what he got. But that's not what I took from it when I first initially saw it. Now that you've said that, that makes sense to me, but it's just not there in the film. So let's move on to some other pleasant things before I bring up my big thing. It's not that big.
Maybe this will help with the whole thing too, because Jesse Plemons' character, you see that he has, at the beginning, he has a family, a wife, and a kid. And then like halfway through the movie, he's talking to you and he's over in Iraq. Like he's a soldier in Iraq. Now, I don't know how true this is. I don't know if they know anything about Dick Cheney's heart donor, but he's over in Iraq and then he's back. And then, Steph like freaked out when he got hit by that car. I mean, I flipped out too, but like she just like reached over and grabbed me and she was like, "Oh no." I mean, it freaks you out, but just the fact that I don't know what Adam McKay's trying to say with that character, other than, I mean, he felt like he needed a narrator, and that's a cool little kind of like Easter eggy type narrator. But I mean, I don't know what Dick Cheney's supposed to do. So like, did he like pay somebody off to get that guy's heart? Like, how evil is Dick Cheney in this scenario? Like, or was he on a heart donor list and somebody who's an organ donor died and he got that organ donor's heart? Is he trying to say that the organ donor wouldn't have wanted Dick Cheney to have his heart? I don't know. I really don't know. Maybe he's trying to say, and I think this is the last shot of the movie, is Dick Cheney's bad heart. Like his literal bad heart. His defective, decaying, old heart on the table. And I think that Adam McKay is maybe trying to say, like, does this guy really, after all the things you've seen, does this guy really need another heart? And that's the only thing I can get from that.
Well, I think it's simple. As a matter of fact, the stuff with Jesse Plemons is my favorite stuff in the film. I love the narration being one person and not going too over the top with it, although he falls back onto that with the little game of Risk or whatever they're playing with the little figures but it's well done. It's shot really well, and it does make it easy to understand things that might in dialogue be hard to understand.
Yeah, how else do you explain that? That's rough.
It is rough. And I like the little caricatures. They looked more like the real human beings and less like the actors, but enough like the actors so it didn't pull you out of it. I like that.
That's cool.
And I was completely blown away when Jesse Plemons gets hit by the car, and then I was like, "Oh, okay, this is starting to make sense." And I think the last shot of the heart is just that it's simple. There are good people and there are bad people. And maybe this guy is just a bad person. I'm not saying that's what Adam McKay is saying. I'm saying that when you see that disgusting looking decaying heart with all the black vines going through it and all that other stuff, it obviously is a bad heart. You can physically say it. Maybe he just is a bad person with a bad heart. Maybe it's a simplified thing. Here's the thing that's interesting to me. And this is what sparked me to want to have a conversation about this. Everything up to this point has been interesting on some level, but I don't lose sleep over it. But there are things that we have talked about and movies that we have seen that I stay up late at night thinking about because they've intrigued me. It's not like I'm punishing myself and losing sleep. It's my thought process keeps me awake, and it's pleasurable. It's not a bad thing. It's not like it's torturing me. But the same thing that happens with the Jesse Plemons character is the same thing that I dislike about most of this film. And you tapped into it. We don't know what that character thought of Dick Cheney unless his wife came out and said, he would never want Dick Cheney to have his heart. But I don't think those things are disclosed. I don't think know. I mean, obviously, by your scenario, these powerful people could find out, but I don't think that's disclosed to the public. So it brings me back to one thing and one thing only. When you see these biopics, there are certain things that are dramatized just for a movie, to continue the narrative, to make this character's choice stand out more. And they didn't say, or even anywhere near where the scene takes place. And it's left up to dramatic interpretation by the director and the screenwriter. And a lot of times you don't even notice that it might not be true. There are thousands of things throughout this film where I went, did that really happen that way? did that person really say that? It just never rang true. And, I'm hoping that I find out that I'm wrong and that people really did say those things or they really did do those things. But none of that made the film gel for me. And the fact that these fabricated scenarios, also with things that only in a movie a person would say, it made it harder to buy into the rest of the film throughout the whole entire process. And then at the end of the film, when you hear Jesse Plemons go, yeah, I wouldn't really want him to have my heart. I went, okay, because I'm buying into that character and that through line, I'm buying into that statement. But did he really say that? How did he know that his heart went to Dick Cheney? He's dead. So how does he know that? So that's obviously not true. But it had a weight to it that made it more true than not. So the fictitious stuff that they made up in that particular scene made sense to me. But this film is riddled with things that I went, did they really say that? Did he really point that out this way? And it just doesn't ring true. Even if it's made up, you still have to make it believable for this realm, for this narrative, for this story. And it doesn't for me.
Yeah, they did a lot of research, and any time when there's like more than 1, 2, 3 people in the room, then those are things that can be corroborated. But things like, him and Lynn Cheney, Dick and Lynn Cheney, like in their house talking back and forth. Yeah, they're kind of making that stuff up. They're trying to figure out what they might have said, or any kind of like one-on-one between Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney. Yeah, that stuff's gonna be made up, and the discussions between Bush and Cheney, those are going to be made up too. I mean, to some extent, something happened.
Yeah, but my problem is not that it's made up. It's that it seems like it's made up. A lot of times people will throw out fictional statements and you're like, wow, that person really said that? That's amazing. And then the person goes, yeah, that person was dead for 10 years. There's no way that they could have said that to that person. So that's completely made up for the movie. But it was so believable for that moment. And it puts the narrative on such a different path that you buy it hook, line, and sinker. And so a lot of that stuff here, whether or not it was 100% real or not, seems made up just for this movie. And that's okay, but it doesn't work well for me. It doesn't make it gel.
So speaking of things that didn't work well for me, the soliloquy in the middle of the movie seemed really backwards to me. Like it was a joke. They went for it and they like extended it out, but it just seemed, it was tiresome. I was like, I get it. Like within like 5 seconds, I was like, I get it. No, I understand what you're doing with, Shakespearean type of, phrasing, talking about things like this, but it just didn't hit for me. That was really the only part of the movie where I was just kind of like cringing in my seat.
Are you talking about the scene between him and his wife?
Yeah, in bed.
Is that an actual scene? Is that Macbeth?
Oh, I have no idea. It sounded like they were talking about things that were going on within themselves. Like it sounded like they were making things up themselves off the cuff. But yeah, I don't know. It just, it did not fit well, I think, in the movie. But one scene that did fit well in the movie that I thought was amazing, and I can't believe we haven't brought it up until now, the credit scene in the middle of the movie.
That's the best.
Amazing.
No one's ever done that before.
Yeah, when I realized what they were doing, especially when he was like, he's now retired and breeds golden retrievers. And I was like, you are kidding me. Like they are actually doing this. They're actually going to, do this kind of like alternate reality thing where it's like, and everyone lived happily ever after. And it's like, oh, well, actually that's totally untrue. But that was one where they extended the joke and it got funnier as it went on. Like rolling the credits, the music swelling, all that stuff was amazing. It was so cool. I loved it. It was hilarious.
Yeah, but that's my point. That's exactly something that I'm talking about is the opposite of what happened to me for the rest of the film. First of all, that choice is, just amazing because it's never been done before, which it's shocking that it's never been done before because it's such a brilliant choice. But that's the point. The point is that never happened. He didn't raise golden retrievers. They didn't live happily ever after outside of the public eye. None of that happened. So we know that that's not true. But what it does is it propels the rest of the narrative to understand that this is probably the way to have gone with your life.
Yes.
To have retired and all that other stuff, but that's not what happened. So it propels the narrative in a different direction than you're expecting it to. It never happened. It's completely made up. It's fictionalized for a point. It's hilarious on so many different levels because I was looking around to see if anybody was getting ready to get up and walk out, thinking that was the actual end of the movie. And I'm wondering if I didn't know anything about this story, if I would have thought, well, that was an awfully short movie. Oh, and they live happily ever after. Why did I see this movie? But the point is that is a really bold choice to make a point about where your narrative has been and where it should be and where it's going. And it's completely fictionalized. So that brings me back to my point I was making just a few seconds ago about the dialogue and the fictional things that people say seem so trumped up that it doesn't propel. It pulled me out and I went, people did not say that. There's no way people said that. And like I said before, I will admit that there are things that I'm sure people did say that sounded fictional anyway. And I'll admit to it once I figure out the difference, because now I'm going to start referencing that stuff and starting to research that stuff. But that's my point. None of that stuff rang true, even for this world, the world that he creates in this film. So, but I don't mean to take it back to something I didn't like about the film, because it really is. It is the single best thing in the film. It really is a great choice.
No, I loved it too.
I was just trying to look up to see if that was actual Shakespeare, but apparently Adam McKay has a thing for Shakespeare because they reference quite a few things, because it did sound like Shakespeare. And if it's made up Shakespeare, once again, it validates what I was saying earlier. That kind of made up stuff lit me up. That scene, although you thought it was a little tiresome and it wore out pretty quick.
Very quickly.
For me, for me, it made sense because they were speaking what they were really thinking versus all this quiet, power-hungry tendencies that were going on. And they were actually showing each other and kind of seducing each other with the words. And so that's the powerhouse of Amy Adams and Christian Bale. That's the powerhouse. And it's always fun to see people do Shakespeare, regardless of whether or not it was real or not, because it seemed like Shakespeare. Mm-hmm. And I should know if that's real Shakespeare, but I don't. Anyway, that's the point.
Well, I read 2 Shakespeares, so.
Well, I've seen a ton, and usually once it's
that was
done,
a George W. Bush reference.
Oh, is that what he says?
Yeah. He said, he's like, I came back from vacation. I read 2 Shakespeares.
Yeah. Jesus, God have mercy on my soul. Anyway, the man, the myth, the legend. Yep. The point is that I felt hungry after this film, and not hungry in a good way. I felt like I should have been hungry for knowledge about this person, and I'm feeling like I'm hungry for knowledge because I missed something in this film. And I'm not saying it's the movie. I'm saying maybe it's my take on it, my understanding of it. So that said, it's one of those movies that if you were to say, would you recommend it? Not if you're not a complete history buff and or an Adam McKay fan. Mm-hmm. Other than that, it's The Big Short. I would have been like, go see that movie. It's the best. Mm-hmm. And I understood that topic better than I've ever understood it from what I read and what I came to understand through everything we went through as a country. I understood it better because of The Big Short. I don't feel that way with this film.
Okay. All right. Well, I liked it, and like I said, I tend to lean more conservative anyway, but I did think that Adam McKay did a good job in getting out what he wanted to get out about Dick Cheney and about our country at that point in time, especially during the Bush presidency. And he did it in an entertaining way. And I thought that the performances were great. And so Will I see it again? I don't know. I don't know if I'll see it again or not, but
Wait a second. The question should be, do you have a desire at this point to see it again?
I feel like I got everything out of it that I should have.
That's not an answer to your question. The question is, do you have a desire right now to see it again?
No. That's I don't think that makes it a bad movie.
No, I don't either.
Do you have a desire right now to see Requiem for a Dream again?
That's a different thing, though. That's like saying, do I have a desire right now to see The Exorcist or Clockwork Orange? Those are traumatizing movies that I don't want to see again because I don't want to be traumatized again and again and again and again. There's a psychological ramification from seeing those films.
Now, neither one of us may have been psychologically affected by the choices that were made by our government in the early 2000s, but I'm guessing a lot of people were affected by those choices. So in a lot of ways, they may not want to see this movie again for those exact reasons. But I don't know. I mean, I think that I feel like I got everything out of it I needed to. So, and I got so many movies I got to see. So, all right. Well, you can check us out on the web at actorandengineer.com, facebook.com/actorandengineer, and you can tweet us at actorengineer. We'll see you next time.